Doing amazing things based on true story. Although Moby Dick was not a real whale, actual events did happen that inspired the novel by the restless sailor and poet Herman Melville. From 1849 to 1850, Melville wrote two more novels, Redburn and White Jacket, which he later claimed to have written to achieve much greater fame and fortune. By 1852, his last novels were very modest triumphs, but they nonetheless kept him some acclaim. It's when he unknowingly writes his emblematic work, Moby Dick. The story focuses on the Pequot whaler. Its captain, Ahab, lost a leg by a giant white whale named Moby Dick. Ahab was left very traumatized and obsessed with his revenge to hunt down and kill the huge white sperm whale. He had first thought of this idea after reading an 1839 article by Jeremiah Reynolds entitled Moby Dick, set about the life of a huge, difficult-to-hunt white whale in the deep Chilean seas. While writing Moby Dick, Melville met and became close friend with Nathaniel Hawthorne, who had recently published the literary masterpiece The Scarlet Letter. Hawthorne provided Melville with valuable comments on his draft and encouraged him to turn his detailed account of the painful whaling into a much more allegorical novel. In other words, the idea was to give a certain image to everything had no image at all. The allegorical overtones that Melville cultivated in Moby Dick picked up on the link between whaling and an emerging aggressive American identity in the mid-19th century. The novel Moby Dick spawned a symbolic tale of the hunt for the great white whale as an emblem of the human condition and the reckless expansion of the American Republic from its east coast to the west. In October 1851, Moby Dick was published in London. Despite Melville's high expectation, it was almost completely ignored by literary critics. Until the last day of Melville's life, the book had sold only about 2,000 copies. Most likely, this occurred because interest in maritime adventures was waning dramatically for this time as Americans turned all their imagination toward the potential for expansion to west by land rather than by water. With the strong disappointment of Moby Dick, Melville faced his financial ruin. In 1852, as a lifeline, he endeavored to write Pia. Pia was a psychological romance based on his own childhood, but its negative reviews and almost no sale fatally cost him the remainder of savings. So he turned to new short poems and published several in Putnam's monthly magazine in 1854. But general public again relentlessly ignored him, and Melville fell into a very dark time of deep depression. In 1856, a trip to Europe to visit his friend Hawthorne did little to overcome or ease depression over his last dream of recognition and literary fame. Then he made a very long 4-year tour around his country, lecturing in various topics such as status in Rome and the South Seas. In 1863, he returned to New York, where a fan reader found for him work inspecting customs on the dock. During his next 23 years as a dock worker, he continued to write and publish poems, including battle pieces and aspects of the war. There it included representations of soldiers from both sides of the Civil War. Despite being considered one of the greatest poems of the 19th century, battle pieces sold a meager 300 copies in 1869. Melville suffered even more anguish when his oldest son, Malcolm, suddenly committed committed suicide due to depression. Melville traveled again to gain new perspective and writing material. In 1876, he wrote Claro, a poem and pilgrimage in the Holy Land. Based on his experience in Europe and the Holy Land laid the groundwork for a complex religious crisis. He continued to write poetry in his later years, printing his work by John Mayer, but this time in strict privacy, only for friends and family in 1888. On September 28, 1891, Melville died of a sudden heart attack while he was working on the Billy Budd manuscript, a story about a fearless sailor falsely accused of participating in a riot. It was during the 1920s that the literary scholars began to identify Moby Dick as a work that addressed very important issues of the 19th century American experience and began to discuss its allegorical implications. This novel was widely described as an allegory of New England, America's push toward the western prairies and its rush for getting gold, which in symbolic representation, the prairie could be the sea and the gold would be the wave. Moby Dick has been analyzed in classrooms around the world for its successful combination of Shakespeare's rhetoric, philosophical speculation, and dramatic staging and fantastic adventure. Since 1956, many film versions of history have been made, the most famous starring Gregory Peck in the role of the charismatic and deranged Captain Ahab. It was filmed entirely with real scenes of whaling in the waters of the Canary Islands. So the story was successfully introduced in popular culture around the world. In Moby Dick and his other works, Melville was able to address adventure stories that examined many inherently American issues. For example, science versus religion or human limitations versus emerging technology. The conclusions that can be drawn from reading Moby Dick focus on the manifesto of the great ideal of democracy during the boom of the whaling industry for oils and meat, and that many people would be very hard to consider and believe, but still today the struggle is kept on.